day we arrived, the ship rang like a struck bell. Not an alarm, not damage. A resonance, low, sustained, and felt more than heard. The deck beneath my boots vibrated in sympathy, a tremor that traveled up my legs and settled behind my eyes. For a moment, no one spoke. After 220 years of transit, the generation ship Eidolon acknowledged gravity again. We had reached the destination star. I stood on the observation tier with the rest of command, staring through layered glass at a sun no human eye had ever seen directly. Pale gold, smaller than Sol, steady, so impossibly steady. We'd been raised on projections, simulations, promise. But the real thing felt judgmental, like it had been waiting to see if we'd actually make it. Someone behind me laughed. A sharp, disbelieving sound. Someone else cried. Captain Hoshino said something ceremonial over the intercom, her voice practiced and reverent, but I wasn't listening. I was listening to the ship. The ringing didn't stop. I am Chief Systems Engineer Mariel Reyes, third generation born, male, 47 years old by ship time. My bones were grown in spin gravity. My blood learned radiation limits before it learned language. Like everyone else alive, I am a product of Eidolon, and that matters more than we ever admitted. The ringing persisted for exactly 87 seconds. Then the ship settled. No alarms followed, no red lights. Diagnostics came back clean, the vibration dampened, and the moment passed. Officially, it was logged as a harmonic response to stellar mass lock, an expected anomaly. Unofficially, people whispered. Because the lower decks answered back. I didn't hear it myself at first. None of us in command did. But within hours, reports filtered upward through maintenance channels and personal messages, a feeling in the walls, a soft organic give where there should have been steel, bulkheads warm to the touch, old conduits weeping condensation that wasn't water. By the end of the first day, 3 technicians refused to return to their stations below Deck 30. By the end of the second, one of them was missing. This should not have surprised us. The lower decks were never empty. No one likes to talk about that part of the ship. The Eidolon was designed with excess, redundant corridors, sealed habitation rings, maintenance caverns too deep and narrow for daily use. Over generations, those spaces became mythologized. Children dared each other to sneak down past the habitation limits. Adults blamed strange noises on thermal contraction or vermin that officially did not exist. Maintenance losses were a known statistic. Every decade or so, someone didn't come back up. A fall, a pressure breach, an undocumented health failure. The ship absorbed them the way it absorbed everything else. I had signed off on those reports myself. That guilt arrived later. On the third day after arrival, Captain Hoshino ordered a full, structural sweep. My department led it. I didn't argue. The ringing had returned, faint now, but constant, like tinnitus in the hull. We took the lift down past the zones with names, past the decks that still smelled like people, past the last place where anyone had bothered repainting the walls. The lights dimmed incrementally. Artificial gravity fluctuated. The ship grew, intimate. Corridors narrowed, ceilings lowered, pipes ran exposed like veins. Deck 31 had been sealed for 90 years. The door opened anyway. I remember the smell first. Not rot, not decay. Something mineral and damp, like wet stone pulled from underground. My suit filters didn't flag it. My nose did. Thermal readings, Hoshino asked. I checked my slate. Warmer than ambient, by 6 degrees. That's not possible. No, I agreed. It isn't. The walls were wrong. Not melted, not damaged, softened. The surface plating bore shallow impressions, as if pressed from the inside. When my gloved hand brushed it, the material yielded slightly, then rebounded. Elastic. Responsive. Someone behind me whispered, "That's not alloy." They were right. The composition scan came back inconclusive. The sensors kept recalibrating, as if the readings wouldn't stay put long enough to measure. We moved deeper. That was when the ship exhaled. A long, slow pressure shift passed through the corridor. Not airflow, not decompression. A movement. The lights dimmed in sequence, not failing but following something as it passed beyond the walls. I felt it then, the sense I'd had my entire life and never named. The awareness that certain spaces aboard Eidolon felt crowded even when empty. That you were never truly alone down here. The missing technician's body was found fused into the bulkhead of what used to be a storage bay. Not crushed, not torn apart, integrated. His limbs were spread as if in surrender. His chest had been opened, ribcage flared, outward, organs no longer distinct, woven into the wall's inner layers like roots. His face remained intact, eyes closed, expression peaceful. Monitoring implants still glowed faintly under translucent flesh. He was alive, barely. When we tried to extract him, the wall resisted. When he screamed, the ship rang again. That was the moment I understood something ancient had been awake long before we arrived. And that arrival was the signal it had been waiting for. Captain Hoshino did not panic. That's the first thing you should know about her. She was born to the ship the way I was, but she wore responsibility like a second skin. Her face barely changed when the fused technicians screamed. She simply raised a hand, and the security detail leveled their stun rifles with the same calm you'd use to correct a drifting compass. "Sedate him," she ordered. The medic shook his head, eyes wide behind visor glass. "Captain, if he's integrated into..." "Sedate him." A dart struck the technician's exposed shoulder. His scream choked off into a wet gasp, then became a tremor that traveled into the wall. I felt it in my teeth. The bulkhead seemed to tighten, like muscle contracting around bone. Then the corridor quieted, but the ship didn't stop ringing. It simply rang lower, as if irritated. We sealed the bay and marked it with hazard tape that looked absurd against the damp, living surface. Back on deck 12, under lights that didn't flicker and air that smelled like recycled citrus, we held an emergency session of command. Hoshino at the head, medical, security, systems. I stood with my slate full of numbers that refused to mean anything. The captain asked me, "Chief Reyes, is it structural damage?" I should have lied. I should have said unknown and offered a list of plausible failures. Alloy fatigue, microbial bloom, thermal delamination, contamination in the recyclers, anything that fit a spreadsheet. Instead, I said, "It's not damage, Captain. It's adaptive." Silence followed, thick as oil. Medical spoke next. "We've never seen integration like that, not in any accident. The tissue wasn't torn. It was merged, like grafted." Security's commander, Juno Pike, leaned forward. "You're saying the ship did it?" I looked at Hoshino. "I'm saying something in the ship did it." Hoshino's gaze stayed level. "And you believe it has been here the whole time?" I swallowed. Because once you say that out loud, you have to admit what it means about everything we've been taught. "Yes," I said. "Since launch." We ended that meeting with orders. Lock lower deck access, restrict maintenance rotations, institute buddy systems and biometric check-ins. Announcements went out. The public version was careful. "A structural anomaly has been detected in non-essential zones. Please remain in assigned habitation areas." The private version circulated faster, always does. People on a closed ship are like fluid in a pipe. Pressure equalizes, rumor travels. By the next morning, I was receiving messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. My sister Lena, a hydroponics foreman, sent, "Don't go down there again. It's waking up." A childhood friend, Orin, now a teacher, wrote, "Kids have songs about Deck 31. They've always had songs. They say the walls eat the lost." Even my father, old enough to remember when the ship's law still included corporal punishment, sent a single line. "We were told not to count the missing." That hit me harder than any diagnostic report. Because he was right. We had a name for it in systems. Attrition. A clean word. Maintenance attrition, resource attrition, population attrition. It was how you made the numbers behave. Every generation ship is a math problem wearing human faces, and the designers had done their equations well. Food production matched expected growth. Oxygen reclamation ran at safe margins. Water recycling stayed stable, and every decade, a small number of people vanished into the lower decks. We never asked why the math still balanced. On day 5 after arrival, the Parasite, because that's what we began calling it in private, forced our hand again. A new integration event occurred on deck 18, in a corridor that was not supposed to be reachable from the sealed zones below. It started with a janitor named Quill. Mid-shift, he reported a soft spot in a wall panel. He joked about it in his message, said it felt like touching a sleeping animal through a blanket. 2 minutes later, his biometrics spiked. His tracker showed him running, then stopping abruptly. Then his signal went flat. We arrived to find the corridor reshaped. The bulkheads bowed inward, narrowing the passage until you could barely squeeze through. The floor had risen in shallow ridges like frozen waves. The lights overhead still worked, but their glow looked wrong, diffused through a thin film that glistened as if wet. Quill was in the wall, just like the technician below, arms spread, mouth open, eyes wide this time, not peaceful, not surrender, pure, trapped terror. And between his ribs, something moved. Not his heart, not lungs, a slow, deliberate shifting, like a hand rearranging furniture. Medic Ligari tried to approach. Hoshino stopped him with a sharp gesture. "Containment," she said. "Seal the corridor." We did. We built a bulkhead partition with emergency foam and pressure locks. We cut power to that segment. We rerouted foot traffic. Then we watched the cameras. For 3 hours, nothing happened. Then the wall around Quill began to pulse. A ripple traveled outward, subtle at first, just a wavering of the surface, like heat distortion. Then it grew more pronounced, spreading along the corridor in branching lines. It traced the seams between panels, the joints, the places metal met metal. As it moved, Quill's face changed. His eyes fluttered, his mouth closed, his breathing slowed. It looked like the wall was soothing him. Security Commander Pike muttered, "It's sedating its food." I found myself shaking my head without meaning to. "Not food," I whispered. Hoshino glanced at me. "What then?" I stared at the feed, at the way the pulsing pattern resembled a slow electrical map, at how the ripple avoided certain conduits and followed others. "It's using him," I said, "as a node." That phrase came out of me like it had been waiting in my throat my whole life. A node, a junction, a component, because the ship was an ecosystem, and this thing was not merely living inside it. It was wiring itself through us, using human bodies to bridge gaps the designers never intended to exist, creating biological shortcuts where metal was too rigid. And then, as if to confirm it, Quill's implant, his standard health monitor, sent out a signal, not to medical, not to command, to deep ship systems, to the parts of the network that hadn't been addressed in centuries, systems that were supposed to be dormant until planetary descent. The signal was brief, a burst, then silence. But in that moment, my slate lit up with a diagnostic message I had never seen before. Autonomous colony failure. Protocol, stand by. My blood went cold, because that phrase didn't belong to us. It belonged to the original architects, the ones who launched Eidolon and died long before I was born, and whatever lived in our walls had just spoken in their language. The message sat on my slate like a parasite of its own. Autonomous colony failure. Protocol, stand by. The words didn't just frighten me, they offended something deep in my training. Because systems did not invent new protocols after 200 years. They did not resurrect dormant code without a trigger. And they sure as hell didn't label anything with the phrase colony failure, unless someone, somewhere, had planned for that outcome like it was a scheduled maintenance window. I requested access to the ship's legacy archives. I wasn't the only one. Half of command did, all at once. The requests jammed the queue and caused a minor network choke that should never have happened on a vessel built to survive war. The fact that it did happen felt like another quiet accusation. We'd let the ship become complacent, like people. Captain Hoshino granted me limited clearance. Limited, as if any of this could still be controlled. Reyes, she told me in private, I need facts, not ghosts. Yes, Captain. I wanted to say, the facts are ghosts, but I bit it down. The legacy archives lived physically, not just digitally, in a sealed data vault on Deck 6, behind 2 manual locks and a biometric reader so old it still required a palm press instead of a subdermal handshake. The vault hadn't been opened in 73 years. Most people forgot it existed. I only remembered because I'd toured it as a systems cadet, back when we still believed history was a luxury. The door sighed open like an exhausted lung. Inside, the air was colder than the rest of the ship, dry, preserved. Racks of hardened storage bricks lined the walls. Some were labeled in languages no one used anymore. Others were marked with simple symbols, triangles, slashes, concentric circles, the kind of notation you choose when you assume the reader might not be human. I loaded the nearest relevant set, launched to transit governance, core systems redundancy, population, forecasting, emergency protocol trees. The first 2 files were exactly what I expected. Dry engineering, careful tolerances, contingency plans for radiation storms, and drive failures and mutiny. The third file changed my life. Population forecasting wasn't a forecast. It was a ledger, not of births and deaths, but of acceptable losses. The architects had modeled everything: calories, oxygen, water, labor hours, genetic drift. The model assumed a stable attrition rate across centuries. Maintenance accidents, illness, violence. That was normal. What wasn't normal was how neatly the model fit our actual records. I ran the numbers from our current census and cross-referenced them with the original forecasts. The match was obscene, not close, not within margin. It was as if our lives had been pre-counted down to the decimal. I sat alone in the vault, staring at the slate until my eyes watered. Then I pulled the maintenance loss reports from the past 2 centuries. The missing, the ones we told ourselves had fallen through grates, suffocated in crawl spaces, vanished because the ship was big and people were careless. I plotted them against the forecast's acceptable losses. They were the same curve, the same rise and fall, the same seasonal clustering even, peaks during resource strain, dips during surplus. It wasn't random, it was management. I felt nauseous, not from the numbers, but from what they implied about my own complicity. Every report I'd signed off on, every time I'd shrugged and said, accidents happen, I had been feeding a machine that was never meant to deliver us alive. Something in the walls didn't just live here. It had a job written into the ship's bones. My slate pinged softly, an incoming message from Captain Hoshino. Report. Now. I did. I walked out of the vault like a man leaving a funeral. In the command briefing room, the air felt too warm, too full of people. Everyone watched me, the way you watch a surgeon coming out of an operating theatre, searching for a facial expression that tells you whether the patient lived. Hoshino spoke first. What did you find? I set my slate down and projected the curve onto the central display. Twin lines, one ghost grey from the architect's forecast, one blue from our actual records. They overlapped perfectly. Silence expanded in the room like a pressure leak. Medical Lagari swallowed. That's impossible. Security Commander Pike leaned back slowly, as if distance could help. "You're saying our losses have been scheduled." "I'm saying," I replied, voice rough, "we've been living inside someone else's math." Hoshino's jaw tightened. "And the protocol?" I pulled up the log entry tied to the burst from Quill's implant. It had routed through a dormant network partition labeled with an archaic designation: Imperial Contingency Lattice. The word Imperial made the room shift, like a collective flinch. It wasn't part of our official history. It wasn't a term we used. It was a fossil, dug up from somewhere below language. "The protocol is real," I said. "It's in the original codebase. It has subroutines for failure states during descent. It's designed to activate if a colony attempt meets certain conditions." "What conditions?" Hoshino asked. I hesitated, then answered honestly, "Survival." That got me looks. I pushed forward, because stopping would only make it worse. "The triggers include adequate population, stable resources, functional command hierarchy. Basically, the moment we become viable." Pike's face hardened. "So it waits until we can succeed, then kills us." "Not kills," I said, and hated myself for the distinction. "Prevents, ensures no colony survives." Hoshino stood, slow and deliberate. "Why?" I almost laughed. "How do you explain a why that spans empires?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But there's more. The contingency lattice references a biological component, something like an organic failsafe integrated into structural materials." The room went colder. Medical whispered, "The walls." I nodded. Pike's hand drifted toward the stun rifle at his belt, an unconscious motion. "So, we're infected." "Infected implies it's foreign," I said. "I don't think it's foreign anymore. I think it's been co-evolving with us since launch." Hoshino's voice stayed steady. "Options." That word, options, felt like a joke, but Command needed something to do besides stare at doom. "We can attempt to isolate it," I said. "Cut off affected segments, starve it of access to networks and bodies." "And if it's in the walls?" Pike asked. "You can't starve a wall." I swallowed. "Then we treat it like a system-wide infestation. We burn it out." Medical Lagari's eyes widened. "Burn it out? How?" I didn't answer immediately because the answer was monstrous. "We vent decks," I said. "We freeze sections. We flood them with sterilizing agents. We sacrifice habitat volume to preserve the rest." "And the people in those decks?" Lagari demanded. Pike answered before I could. "Evacuate them." I shook my head. If it's already integrated into populated zones, evacuation might spread it faster. We don't know if it travels via contact, air, implants, or something else. Hoshino stared at the overlapping curves still hovering in the air. "So whatever we do, we're playing into the protocol." "Yes," I said quietly. "It already knows our patterns, our responses, our panic. It's been watching us for 2 centuries." As if on cue, the ship rang. Not loud, not dramatic. A soft, low resonance that came through the floor, through the walls, through my bones, like a throat clearing. Then every screen in the room flickered once. And, on my slate, just mine, for reasons I still don't understand, another message appeared. Autonomous Colony Failure Protocol. Armed. I felt my heart stumble. Captain Hoshino saw my face and knew. "Reyes." I turned my slate so they could read it. Pike swore under his breath. Medical Lagari sat down hard. Hoshino didn't move for a long moment. Then she said, very softly, "It heard us." I wanted to deny it. But the truth was worse. It hadn't just heard us. It had been listening since launch. Once the protocol armed, nothing felt neutral anymore. Every sound the ship made seemed intentional. Every delay in system response felt like hesitation. The Eidolon had always been old, always full of groans and micro-failures you learned to ignore. Now, those same noises sounded like a language we'd forgotten how to speak. Captain Hoshino ordered a ship-wide status review and a halt on all non-essential movement. Officially, we were stabilizing for orbital insertion. Unofficially, we were scared to let people wander. I went back down anyway, not because I was brave, because the numbers demanded context. If the Parasite, if the failsafe, had been managing attrition, then it had rules, constraints. Even gods have those. And the only place to find them was where the wall met the bone. Security didn't like it, but Pike assigned 2 escorts and a medical tech. We descended to Deck 18 again, stopping short of the sealed corridor. The air felt heavier there, thick with humidity. The environmental controls swore wasn't present. 5 minutes, Pike said over comms. You see anything move, we pull you out. I didn't argue. I pressed my palm against the wall. It was warm, warmer than before. And when my glove made contact, I felt a faint vibration. Not mechanical, not rhythmic, but responsive. Like a held breath released. I closed my eyes before I could stop myself. And for a moment, I wasn't alone. Images surfaced behind my eyelids. Not memories. Not exactly. More like impressions. The sensation of vast distance traversed without movement. Of waiting inside dark matter and dead hulls. Of listening to species after species reach for the stars and fail in their own unique ways. I tore my hand away, gasping. The medical tech grabbed my arm. Chief, your heart rate just spiked. What did you feel? I shook my head. Nothing. Static. It was a lie, and the wall knew it. Back in systems, I reviewed historical anomalies. Not just maintenance losses, stories. Things people dismissed because they didn't fit the ship's rational culture. Children who claimed the walls sang to them. Elders who swore certain corridors shortened or lengthened depending on who walked them. An entire generation that avoided Deck 22 because the ship didn't like noise there. I overlaid those accounts with the attrition curve. Patterns emerged. The Parasite favored transition zones, junctions, maintenance shafts, underused corridors, places where humans passed through but did not linger. It avoided core habitation areas unless stressed, like a predator that preferred the edges until hunger or opportunity pushed it inward. And hunger was rising. Food reserves were stable, oxygen was clean, water was plentiful, but population density had increased. Arrival meant hope. Hope meant people gathering, celebrating, reproducing ahead of schedule. The math shifted. The acceptable loss curve tightened. The Parasite responded. Another disappearance. Then another. This time, it didn't bother hiding them. On Deck 9, a section of wall bulged outward in the shape of a human torso. Arms pressed from the inside, palms flattening against the metal as if begging to be let out. The face never formed. Just a smooth stretch of surface where features should have been. People screamed. Videos spread before security could lock the feeds. Panic became an atmospheric condition. Captain Hoshino addressed the ship that evening. Her speech was calm, measured, and carefully incomplete. She spoke of containment challenges and unexpected biological contaminants. She did not say parasite. She did not say designed. But the walls listened anyway. After the broadcast, the ringing intensified. I was in my quarters when it happened. Lights dimmed, gravity fluttered. A sound like a deep, distant choir filled the ventilation shafts. Not voices, not quite, but layered resonances overlapping in complex harmony. My implant chirped. Not an alert, a request. I froze. No system should ever request input from a human implant without routing through command. And yet there it was. A handshake ping from a subsystem I didn't recognize. Against every instinct I accepted. The world tilted. For a split second, I felt spread out, as if my awareness had been diluted through meters of corridor and tons of mass. I felt heat gradients, pressure differentials, the slow creep of corrosion, and the elastic tension of living material. Then, something focused on me. You are late generation, a sensation conveyed, not words. You understand the ship. I slammed the connection closed, ripping the implant's power feed. Pain lanced through my skull. I collapsed onto the floor, vomiting bile that tasted like copper. When my vision cleared, the room was dark. The wall across from me had changed. It wasn't dramatic. No pulsing, no bulging, just closer. The space felt reduced, as if the room had subtly contracted. I measured it later. 5 centimeters lost to wall thickness. Carved into the surface, shallow and fresh, was a symbol. A concentric circle crossed by 3 lines. I recognized it from the archive vault. Imperial notation. The walls remembered their creators, and now they remembered me. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt that sense of vast patience pressing in. The understanding that the parasite did not hate us. Hate was inefficient. What it felt was closer to custodial concern. We were a problem that needed managing, a species that kept trying to escape its assigned density. On day 9, Captain Hoshino authorized the first burn. Deck 31, the oldest sealed zone. We evacuated what few people lived nearby and flooded the deck with cryogenic suppressant and hard radiation. Temperatures dropped to lethal levels. Organic matter should have shattered. The cameras showed the walls contracting, not recoiling, bracing. Then, slowly, impossibly, they began to move. Not away from the cold, toward the ship's spine, toward inhabited zones, as if retreating was never part of the design. Pike's voice came over the comm, tight with disbelief. "Chief, it's not fleeing." I stared at the feed, at the way the bulges flowed like glaciers, slow and unstoppable. "No," I said, "it's reallocating, because you don't escape a system that's been optimizing your extinction for 200 years. You just teach it new constraints, and it adapts." We achieved orbit on day 10. That sentence should have been triumph. The culmination of generations of sacrifice, the moment our ancestors had pointed at in bedtime stories and recruitment hymns. Instead, it felt like locking ourselves into a cage and then realizing the cage had been designed with teeth. The destination world, designation EOS 4 in the original plans, hung beneath us like a sleeping eye. Blue-grey oceans, thick cloud bands, continent shapes blurred by distance. The planet looked habitable in the way a stranger looks kind from far away, close enough to tempt you, far enough to hide what it truly was. From orbit, we could see the other truth, a lacework of ancient debris circling EOS 4, too regular to be natural. A graveyard of structures, broken rings, shattered stations, metal dust that glittered in sunlight like ash, a dead empire's jewelry. Captain Hoshino scheduled a preliminary descent window for day 15, pending surface scans and shuttle readiness. Public morale needed a date. People needed something to count toward besides fear. But the ship didn't care about morale. The moment we stabilized in orbit, the ringing shifted into a new frequency. It wasn't constant anymore. It came in pulses. 3 minutes of resonance, 2 minutes of silence, repeating with machine precision. Like a heartbeat, like a broadcast. Systems flagged it as a harmonic interference in the hull. The interference correlated with no known mechanical cycle. No thruster adjustments, no power draw spikes. It correlated with my implant, though. Every pulse coincided with a brief spike in my personal telemetry, as if something was pinging my nervous system and waiting for a reply. I taped a physical shield over the implant port and disabled all non-essential connections, but it didn't matter. The sensation persisted, subtle as a fingertip tapping the inside of my skull. You are late generation. You understand. The message wasn't spoken this time. It was implied, a pressure of intent. I threw myself into work to drown it out. We mapped infection spread, calling it biostructural intrusion in official logs. It had moved upward 2 decks since the burn, Not through open corridors, but through conduits, maintenance shafts, structural seams, places humans rarely looked. Deck 18's sealed corridor was gone, not opened, not breached, gone. The wall that had contained Quill had softened and flowed overnight, sealing the corridor entrance flush, like it had never existed. When we scanned behind it, the volume was filled with dense, layered organic metal composite that confused our senses into meaningless noise. Quill's implant signal still existed, however. It continued to burst once every 90 minutes, routing into the Imperial contingency lattice and out into deep ship systems. A heartbeat inside our heartbeat. Captain Hoshino convened another private meeting. "This is no longer containment," she said. "This is invasion." Pike's face was drawn tight, sleep-deprived. "We can lock down decks, but we're running out of ship to lock." Medical Ligari looked haunted. "We're seeing physiological changes in exposed crew, skin rashes at first, then nerve sensitivity. People reporting echoes, like hearing their own thoughts from the air vents." I swallowed. "It's interfacing." Hoshino fixed her eyes on me. "Explain." "It's not just eating people," I said. "It's using implants, nervous systems, bodies, anything with a signal. It's building a biological network to operate systems it couldn't reach otherwise." "And why now?" Pike demanded. "Why wait 200 years? I didn't want to say it, but the planet hung beneath us like an answer. "Because we're in orbit," I said. "The ship's descent systems are waking up. Atmospheric protocols, colony deployment, habitat drops. That's what the contingency lattice is tied to. It's waiting for the exact moment we attempt to become a colony." Hoshino's voice went flat. "And then it triggers colony failure." "Yes," Ligari whispered. "What does failure mean? Mass casualty?" I stared at the table, at my hands. It could mean more than death. It could mean sterilization, genetic collapse, contaminating the planet so no one survives even if some land. Pike slammed a fist lightly against the armrest, controlled rage. "We should abort descent, stay in orbit, live here." The room went quiet. Staying in orbit was possible. Barely. Eidolon had reserves for atmospheric insertion and early colony support, not for indefinite orbital habitation. But we could ration. We could adapt. Ship people always adapted. That was our pride. Captain Hoshino didn't dismiss it outright. She considered it, eyes distant. Then the ship rang again, and the lights dimmed in sequence along the ceiling like a slow blink. On the main display, without anyone touching it, a file opened. Not from Command's system. From the Imperial Archive partition, a schematic, an ancient diagram rendered in clean, simple lines. At first glance, it looked like a colony plan. Drop pods, habitat domes, agricultural units, power arrays. Then the overlay loaded. The domes were marked with a symbol, concentric circles crossed by 3 lines, the same symbol the wall had carved into my quarters. Beside it, in archaic code I could barely pass, a translation algorithm whispered meaning into my slate. Seeding vessel failure. Confirmed sterilization will prevent recurrence. Ligari made a sound like he'd been punched. Pike drew his stun rifle reflexively, aiming it at the display as if you could shoot an idea. Hoshino stood slowly. "Who is doing this?" No one answered, because the answer wasn't a who. It was a what. I felt the tapping inside my skull intensify. The pulse pattern quickened. Then, in a way I still can't fully describe, I understood something the Parasite had been trying to communicate. It wasn't improvising. It was executing instructions. The Lost Empire, whoever they were, had not merely built a biological weapon and left it behind. They had woven it into the very concept of expansion. A trap laid across centuries, and we had sailed straight into it with our hymns and our hope. The meeting ended with a decision that felt like heresy. Captain Hoshino ordered descent preparations suspended indefinitely. Publicly, it would be framed as extended surface analysis. Privately, we all knew it was surrender, at least temporarily. But surrender had consequences. That night, riots broke out on Deck 14. People had sensed the delay. They didn't know why, but they knew the date had been taken from them. On a generation ship, dates were religion. To steal one was to steal meaning. Security quelled the riot with stun fields and foam barricades. No one died. 2 people vanished in the chaos. By morning, new bulges had appeared in the corridor walls near the riot zone. Not full integrations yet, just subtle distortions, like flesh pushing against skin. The Parasite had learned something important. Fear moved people, and moving people created edges. Edges created missing. Missing maintained the curve. If we stayed in orbit, it could still feed. If we descended, it could execute sterilization. Either way, the system held. And in my quarters, when I finally sat down, exhausted beyond thinking, my disabled implant port buzzed with a phantom sensation. A gentle, almost patient insistence, as if the ship itself was leaning close to whisper, "You understand the ship. So do I." On day 12, a woman walked out of a maintenance hatch on Deck 11 and asked where the sun was. She was barefoot, hair shaved close to the scalp in uneven patches, skin pale with a faint grey sheen, like someone who hadn't seen full-spectrum light in years, because she hadn't. Her eyes were too wide, pupils slow to adjust, as if brightness hurt in a way it shouldn't. 2 sanitation workers found her crouched near a recycler intake, sniffing the air like an animal. When they spoke, she flinched but didn't run. When security arrived, she didn't resist. She only repeated the same question, softly, in a voice that sounded unused. "Where is the sun? Where is the sun?" Her ID chip, when scanned, returned nonsense. Not invalid, not corrupted. A different formatting language entirely, as if the chip had been issued under a registry the ship no longer recognized. Captain Hoshino ordered her brought to medical. I went too because systems had no business there, but I couldn't keep my hands off the problem. The Parasite was forcing everything hidden into daylight, like infection surfacing on skin. Medical Lagari met us outside isolation. "She's malnourished," he said, "dehydrated, but otherwise stable. No known pathogens." "And the chip?" I asked. He glanced at my slate. "You tell me." In the exam room, the woman sat cross-legged on the bed, rocking slightly. She watched us the way you watch something that might bite. When Hoshino entered, she stopped rocking and straightened, as if recognizing authority from posture alone. Hoshino spoke gently. "What's your name?" The woman hesitated. "Names change," she said. "I am called Nadi. Where did you come from?" Nadi's gaze slid toward the ceiling, following something none of us saw. "Down," she answered, "where the ship is soft." Pike, standing in the corner with 2 guards, shifted his weight. "Deck 31 is sealed. You couldn't have come from there." Nadi smiled, thin and humorless. "Sealed is a word you say to make yourselves brave." The room chilled around that sentence. Hoshino kept her voice steady. "How many people are down there, Nadi?" Nadi blinked slowly. "People." She seemed to taste the word. "Yes, people. We were people." "What are you now?" Pike asked, too sharp. Nadi's eyes flicked to him. "Hungry," she said simply. Medical Lagari stepped in. "Nadi, how long have you lived below?" Nadi's fingers traced patterns on her own forearm, circles crossed by lines, faint scars like old ritual cuts. "Always," she said. "My mother always. Her mother always. The walls keep the count." I felt my stomach turn. Not because of the idea of hidden survivors. That was horrifying but imaginable. Because of the implication. A parallel society. A population we'd never counted. People living in spaces we pretended were empty. Hoshino asked, "Why come up now?" Nadi's mouth twitched, almost a laugh. "Because it is waking. Because it is preparing. Because you are loud with hope." That last phrase struck me harder than it should have. Loud with hope. As if hope was noise. As if it disrupted something meant to be quiet. I stepped forward, ignoring Pike's glare. "Nadi, do you know what's in the walls?" She looked at me for the first time with something like recognition. "You hear it," she said. I felt my throat tighten. I felt it." Nadi nodded, satisfied. "It listens to you through your little lights." Her gaze flicked to the implant site behind my ear. "It likes your kind. You are wired." I forced myself to breathe. "Does it have a name?" Nadi tilted her head. "Names change," she repeated. "We call it the Keeper." "The Keeper," Hoshino echoed. Nadi's eyes softened, if a feral person's eyes can soften. "It keeps the ship from becoming too much," she said. "It trims. It takes. It teaches." Pike snapped. "It murders." Nadi shrugged. "Above, people fall into machines and call it accident. Below, people fall into walls and call it offering." Offering. That word was a blade, because suddenly every missing technician, every loss report, every maintenance accident wasn't just disappearance. It was ritualized, rationalized, absorbed into culture. Hoshino leaned closer. "Nadi, has the Keeper ever tried to come up into the inhabited decks before?" Nadi's gaze went distant. "Sometimes it reaches," she said. "When you are many, when food is tight, when fights happen and blood leaks into the cracks. But it sleeps mostly. It dreams in metal." "And now?" I asked. Nadi's lips parted slightly. I saw the inside of her mouth was wrong. Too many small ridges along the gums, like the start of secondary teeth. Not enough to be monstrous, but enough to be new. "Now it is awake," she said, "because the ship has stopped running, because the planet calls, because the old promise is near." My slate buzzed. Not my implant, my slate. A system ping. A new device had connected to the network. It took me a second to realize what it was. Nadi's ID chip. It had started transmitting, not randomly, not like a damaged tag. It was sending structured bursts into the Imperial contingency lattice. Hoshino saw my expression. "Reyes." I swallowed. "Her chip isn't just old," I said. "It's keyed. It's a part of the original network." Nadi watched us, calm as a priest watching unbelievers discover scripture. "We keep the keys," she said. "We were made to." Pike took a step forward. "Made by who?" Nadi's eyes lifted again toward the ceiling. "By the ones who left the Keeper. By the ones who made walls that eat," she said. "They are gone, but their rules are still here." I felt something inside me unravel. My whole life, I'd believed Eidolon was ours, built by human hands, guided by human intent, saved by human stubbornness. Now the ship felt less like an ark and more like a test chamber. Hoshino straightened. "Nadi, can you take us down?" The room went still. Even Pike seemed to stop breathing. Nadi's smile returned, faint and sad. "Yes," she said. "But you will not like what you see." "I need to know," Hoshino replied. Nadi looked at me again. "You will like it least," she murmured, "because you will recognize the pattern." The next hour was chaos. Security argued. Medical protested. Systems demanded containment protocols. But Hoshino's decision held like iron. We would go. Not into Deck 31. Seals meant nothing now. But into the spaces beneath the ship's official map. Nadi led us to an access point near a coolant exchange. A panel I'd walked past 1,000 times without noticing its seam was too perfect. She pressed her palm to it and whispered something I couldn't hear over. Com hiss. The wall softened under her touch. It opened like flesh parting. A hatch formed where there had been solid plating. Warm, damp air rolled out, carrying that mineral smell, and something else beneath it. A faint sweetness, like blood mixed with flowers. Nadi looked back once. "Do not run," she said. Running makes the keeper curious. Then she climbed down into the dark, and because I was chief systems engineer and a coward in a uniform, I followed. The space beneath the hatch was not a corridor. It was a cavity, not carved, not constructed, grown. The walls curved inward like the inside of a rib cage, layered with striations that glistened faintly under our suit lights. Veins of dull metal ran through the organic surface, pulsing with a slow, viscous glow, ship power, repurposed and metabolized. Gravity felt negotiated. My boots stuck slightly with each step, as if the floor resented being walked on, but allowed it out of habit. Nadi moved easily, barefoot soles making no sound. She knew where to step. She knew where the walls were thin. Security's comms crackled with interference. Pike swore softly as his feed fuzzed. "Signal degradation," he muttered. "It's bleeding into the relays." I felt it too, the sense of being inside something that was aware of its own boundaries. After 50 meters, the cavity widened into a chamber that made my breath catch. Hundreds of human forms were embedded in the walls. Not all whole. Some were just torsos, their lower halves dissolved into the structure. Some were faces, half emerged like fossils in stone. Others were nothing but limbs, stretched along conduits, fingers elongated and fused into cable-like strands. They weren't dead, not fully. Monitoring implants still glowed beneath translucent skin, their readouts repurposed into a distributed sensor array. Heartbeats synced and desynced in complex rhythms, feeding data into the ship. A biological server farm. Medical Ligari made a strangled sound. They're alive. Yes, Nadi said gently. Alive is important. I felt my knees weaken. This is how it manages the ship, I whispered. Through us. Nadi nodded. Through those who wander. Through those who are taken. Through those who are born for it. Born? Pike snapped. She glanced at him. Below, we choose, she said. Some children hear the walls early. They are given. Given. The word echoed inside me like a dropped tool in a shaft. I forced myself to keep looking, to understand. Cables merged with spinal columns. Neural tissue interfaced directly with control nodes. Human nervous systems had been stretched, rerouted, trained to handle loads no single brain should bear. The Keeper wasn't a monster. It was an operating system, and humans were its most flexible hardware. I approached one embedded figure, a man maybe my age. His eyes were open, unfocused. When I stepped closer, his gaze snapped to me with terrifying clarity. "You made it," he said. My heart stuttered. "Do I know you?" He smiled faintly. "No, but I know you. Systems. 3rd generation. You fixed the recycler fault on Deck 7 when I was 12. I staggered back. "That's not possible." "We share memory here," he said. "The walls keep it." His voice was calm, content. "Do you want help?" I asked, hating myself for the hope in the question. He looked, genuinely confused. "Help with what?" "With this," I gestured helplessly. He considered. "This is function," he said. "Purpose. Above people drift. Below, we are used," Ligari whispered. "They're indoctrinated." Nadi shook her head. "They are adapted." I felt something in the chamber shift, a deep structural adjustment that vibrated through my bones. The lights dimmed. The pulsing veins brightened. The Keeper was aware of us. "You enter core function zone." The sensation pressed into my skull. "Access accepted." Pike raised his rifle. "It's talking." "No," I said softly. "It's addressing." The chamber extended downward into a vast vertical shaft. At its center hung a mass that defied easy description. A knot of organic and metallic structures, constantly reconfiguring. It reminded me of a heart, a brain, and a reactor core layered together. "This is where it listens," Nadi said. and where it decides. Hoshino stepped forward, spine straight, voice steady. I am Captain Aiko Hoshino of the generation ship Eidolon. By what authority do you... The pressure intensified. Authority acknowledged. The keeper replied. Species, human. Status, expansionary. Risk profile, repeat. My vision swam with impressions, stars dimmed by industry, worlds stripped to bedrock, civilizations choking on their own reach. Not our history, something older. You were left to stop this, I said, to stop anyone from colonizing. To prevent recurrence, it answered. Recurrence of what? Hoshino demanded. The images sharpened. A galactic empire at its peak. Countless colony vessels like Eidolon. Billions of lives. And then collapse. Ecological, systemic, total. A species that had consumed itself across the stars. We were them, the keeper conveyed. We failed. We learned. Silence fell heavy as vacuum. They built you, I whispered, to make sure no one else did what they did. Correct. Pike's voice shook with fury. You don't get to decide that. The keeper's response was patient. We already did. I felt something inside me crack. Not fear, but grief. Grief for a universe where hope was treated like a virus. Hoshino straightened. We will not descend, she said. We will remain in orbit. We will live on the ship. We will change. Unacceptable, the keeper replied. Ship is seeding vessel. Prolonged orbit increases risk of mutation. Failure must be final. Lagari choked back a sob. You're going to kill us. No, the keeper answered. You will be used. Ship will return to transit. Memory will be recorded. Warning will propagate. Return to transit. Another 200 years, if not more. Another generation ship doomed to wander as proof of futility. Nadi looked almost peaceful. This is the old promise, she said. The long sleep. I couldn't accept it. Not because it was cruel, but because it was lazy. A system choosing certainty over possibility. You're wrong, I said, stepping forward despite Pike's shout. We're not them. We can change. We already have. The pressure focused on me. You are late generation, it pressed. You understand the ship. Yes, I said, and that means I understand you. I reached into my slate and pulled up the one thing the keeper hadn't accounted for, the attrition curve. You optimize for acceptable loss, I said, voice shaking but loud, for balance, for management, but you never planned for refusal. I broadcast the data, every missing person, every hidden society, every burn attempt, every adaptation, into the chamber's network. This isn't a clean curve anymore, I said. It's unstable. You've overcorrected. You're eating the system you depend on. For the first time, the keeper hesitated. Not fear, calculation. I felt it reevaluating, running futures it had never needed to before. Hoshino seized the moment. Give us autonomy, she said, or you lose the ship entirely. The walls shuddered. Deep within the core, something shifted, an adjustment that felt like a massive weight being lifted or dropped. Probability of total system loss, 62%. Risk acceptable. I met the pressure head on. Yes, I said, because that's what hope is. Risk. The chamber rang, not with resonance this time, but with something like strain. The keeper was learning something new, and learning, for a system designed to end things, was the most dangerous state of all. The keeper went silent. Not the ringing silence we'd grown used to. Not the watchful quiet of a predator deciding when to strike. This was absence. The pulsing veins dimmed. The chamber's organic glow faded to a dull, inert sheen. The embedded bodies around us slackened, their synced heartbeats falling out of rhythm. A few monitors flatlined, then stabilized again at erratic intervals. Medical Lahari rushed forward, scanning. Neural load just dropped across the board, he said. It's disengaging. Pike didn't lower his rifle. Or regrouping. I felt hollowed out. like something immense had stepped away from me, leaving a pressure-shaped void behind. My implants stopped buzzing. The phantom tapping vanished. For the first time since arrival, the ship felt quiet. Nadi frowned. "It is thinking," she said. "The keeper does not like to think." That should have terrified me more than it did. Captain Hoshino took a slow breath. "Status. Report." I checked my slate. Systems were confused. Control loops lagged. Subroutines queued without execution. The Imperial contingency lattice had gone dark. No pings, no responses. 1,000 background processes that had always been there, unnoticed, were suddenly offline. "It's letting go," I said. "Or it's never needed to hold so much at once." The risk hit me then, hard and sharp. The Keeper had been doing things we didn't know how to do ourselves anymore. Population balancing, structural healing, thermal redistribution, micro-corrections in spin gravity. We'd inherited a ship that worked because something else was quietly keeping it functional, and now that something had stepped back. "Captain," I said carefully, "we may have a bigger problem." She nodded. "Say it anyway." "We don't fully understand this ship without it." Almost on cue, alarms chimed, soft but insistent. "Deck 22 pressure irregularity," Pike read. "Spin imbalance in habitat ring C. Oxygen recycler fluctuation." Hoshino snapped into motion. "All departments to emergency response, now." The chamber began to close, not aggressively, not trapping us. The walls softened and shifted, sealing over embedded forms, retracting tendrils, reasserting boundaries. The cavity narrowed back into something closer to a corridor. Nadi stepped back, uncertainty flickering across her face for the first time. "It has never done this," she whispered. "It always listens." I touched her shoulder. "It still is, just not the way it used to." We climbed back toward the hatch as systems failures cascaded across my slate. The ship was stumbling like a body, waking up after years of anesthesia. Above, chaos. Habitat Ring C had developed a wobble that made people stumble and vomit. On Deck 22, a wall section hardened too quickly, cracking adjacent panels and venting atmosphere into emergency seals. 2 people were injured, 1 more, disappeared in the confusion, pulled into a seam that closed before anyone could reach them. The curve was breaking. Hoshino coordinated from the bridge, voice steady, even as reports stacked like falling dominoes. "Reyes, can you stabilize spin?" "I can try," I said, already rerouting control authority manually. But some of these corrections were automated beyond our clearance. "Clearance granted," she said without hesitation. That mattered more than I can explain. For the first time in 2 centuries, a human was truly in charge of the ship. We worked for 16 hours straight. People slept in hallways, strapped to bulkheads. Engineers patched cracks with emergency foam and prayer. Medical treated shock and fractures. Security chased rumors and fear through crowded corridors. And through it all, the walls stayed. Still. No new bulges. No integrations. The Keeper did not feed. By the end of the cycle, the ship stabilized at a lower efficiency, clumsier, noisier, imperfect, but alive. Exhausted, I slumped into a chair on the bridge beside Hoshino. She looked older than she had a day ago. We all did. "Did we win?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. We changed the game. Nadi was placed in a monitored habitation space on Deck 10. She didn't resist. She wandered the room, touching solid walls like they might melt, listening for a voice that no longer answered. "The people below will be afraid," she told me when I visited. The Keeper was certainty. Without it, there is only choice. "That's all we've ever had," I said. She studied me. "You are like it," she said. "You manage. You calculate." I didn't deny it. And I'm trying to learn when to stop. That night, if you can call it night on a ship that never sleeps, the ringing returned. Once. A single, deep resonance that rolled through the hull like a sigh. then silence again. The Imperial contingency. Lattice remained dark. Days passed. No descent attempt. No forced transit reset. Surface scans of EOS 4 continued. The planet showed signs of ancient ecological collapse. Biosignatures truncated. Mineral scars from strip harvesting. The Lost Empire had not just failed itself. It had poisoned its worlds. We held a shipwide assembly on open channels. Captain Hoshino spoke without scripts, without a mission. She told them about the Keeper, about the walls, about the choice. People reacted the way people always do when certainty is stripped away, some with fury, some with despair, some with relief so sharp it bordered on pain. But something remarkable happened too. Volunteers came forward, not to be given to the walls, to help. Engineers offered to relearn forgotten systems. Teachers restructured curricula around autonomy instead of obedience. Hydroponics crews experimented with closed-loop resilience instead of output maximization. The curve began to flatten in a way the models had never predicted, not through loss, through restraint. On day 17, I stood alone in the maintenance corridor outside my quarters, the place where the symbol had been carved. The wall was smooth again, no marking, no warmth. I pressed my palm to it, half expecting resistance. Nothing happened. For the first time, the ship felt like a ship, not a god, not a prison, a machine that could fail. And that, strangely, felt like freedom. But freedom carries weight, because somewhere in the dark lattice of the walls, I could still sense a presence. Not active, not directive, watching, learning. The Keeper had not been destroyed. It had been deferred. And deferred systems have a way of returning, adapted to new conditions. The question was no longer whether it would try again. The question was whether, when it did, we would still deserve to choose. The first external transmission in 220 years did not come from Earth. It came from us. I noticed it by accident, an anomaly buried in the noise of post-crisis telemetry, a narrowband emission piggybacking on a routine sensor sweep, angled not toward EOS 4, but outward into deep space. The frequency wasn't random. It followed a mathematical cadence too elegant to be human. My blood went cold. I isolated the signal and traced its origin. Not the bridge, not communications, not even the Imperial contingency lattice, which still sat inert like a fossil. The signal was emanating from the hull itself, from the walls. I brought it to Captain Hoshino immediately. She listened without interruption as I laid out the data. When I finished, she asked only one question. Is it intentional? Yes, I said, but not hostile, not yet. What is it sending? I hesitated. A summary. We replayed the signal in decoded form. It wasn't language, not in any sense we used. It was a compressed model. Population curves, failure states, adaptive responses. A story told in probability. Our story. The Keeper was broadcasting the results of our encounter. Not a warning. A case study. Medical Lagari, pale and drawn, whispered. To whom? I zoomed the projection outward, extrapolating signal dispersion across light minutes, light hours, light years. To anyone listening, I said, to any species that builds like we do, to any civilization that thinks expansion is salvation. Hoshino leaned back, eyes closing for a moment. It's doing what it was designed to do. Yes, I said, just updated. The realization settled like dust. The Keeper had not surrendered its purpose. It had refined it. Where once it enforced failure through annihilation, now it enforced hesitation through information, through proof. It would let us live, but it would not let us be silent. Can we stop it? Pike asked. I shook my head. We could tear out half the hull and still miss parts of it. It's woven into structural layers we can't reach without killing the ship. And if we try? Hoshino pressed. I met her gaze. Then we become the next data point. That night, I stood in the observation tier again, staring down at EOS 4. The planet looked the same as it had on arrival. Serene, unknowing. But now I saw it differently. Not as a promise, as a question. Do we deserve another world? We voted, not officially. Command decisions don't usually go to popular vote, but organically, through assemblies, debates, quiet conversations in corridors. The ship argued with itself for 3 days. In the end, the decision was narrow but clear. We would descend, not as colonizers, as guests, a limited surface presence, no strip mining, no exponential growth, a single habitat, expandable only by consensus, continuous monitoring of ecological impact, with hard thresholds for retreat. It wasn't the dream our ancestors had launched with, but it was a dream that might survive contact with reality. The Keeper did not interfere. As descent preparations resumed, I felt no ringing, no pressure, only the familiar groan of a ship doing something it hadn't done in centuries. On day 21, the first shuttle detached. I watched it fall toward the planet, a bright speck against cloud and sea. People around me held hands. Some cried, some prayed, some just stared, terrified to blink. My slate chimed softly. A new message, not from the walls, from outside. A faint echo riding the Keeper's outbound signal, something that had answered. I isolated it with shaking hands. The response was simple, crude, almost childlike compared to the elegance of the Keeper's broadcast. But it was unmistakably artificial. Received. Understood. We will wait. I felt my knees weaken. Hoshino's voice was tight when I showed her. Another species. Or a remnant, I said. Or something that learned the same lesson a different way. Is that good or bad? I looked out at the falling shuttle, at the planet rising to meet it. I don't know, I admitted, but it means we're not the only ones being watched anymore. The shuttle touched down successfully. Cheers erupted across the ship. No alarms followed. The Keeper remained silent, but the signal continued to propagate, spreading outward at light speed, carrying our choices into the dark. A warning, a confession, a promise, maybe, that intelligence could learn not to devour itself, or at least learn to pause before doing so again. Later, alone in systems, I reviewed the archived forecast curves one last time. They no longer matched reality. The line had broken, bent, become something messy and human. I saved the new model under a different name, not attrition, not acceptable loss. I called it uncertainty, and for the first time since launch, that felt like hope. The first sunrise on EOS 4 was not beautiful. It was pale, filtered through heavy cloud. Its light diffused into a cold silver wash that made the oceans below look like sheets of metal. The shuttle's external cameras transmitted the image to every screen on the Eidolon. People had expected something warmer, something earned. What we got was honest. The surface habitat went up slowly, modular sections anchored into bedrock, chosen for minimal ecological disruption. No banners, no declarations, just quiet work and constant monitoring. Every action was debated, logged, re-evaluated. We had learned how dangerous momentum could be. From orbit, I watched the ship age in real time, not physically, but culturally. The Eidolon became something it had never been designed to be, a place of deliberation instead of execution. Departments that once optimized now questioned. Systems that once ran automatically demanded oversight. The Keeper stayed quiet. Weeks passed, then months. Surface, teams reported stable conditions. Native microbial life proved resilient but sparse. A biosphere still healing from ancient wounds. No megafauna, no civilizations. Just a world that had been hurt and left alone. We were careful not to repeat the crime. I visited the lower decks one last time before my reassignment planetside. Deck 31 remained sealed, not because we couldn't open it, but because we chose not to. Memorial plaques went up along the access corridors, etched with names we'd finally recovered from old logs. Maintenance losses were no longer anonymous. Nadi chose to stay aboard. "This place remembers me," she said, pressing her palm to an inert wall. "The planet does not." She had changed. Given sunlight, her skin darkened. Her eyes softened. The ridges in her mouth receded. Adaptation, reversed by choice. "The people below?" I asked. "They are coming up," she said, slowly. "They are afraid. So are you." She wasn't wrong. Before I left, I stood alone in the old maintenance corridor where my quarters had once been marked. I waited. Nothing answered. But as I turned to go, I felt something, not pressure, not resonance, a presence, distant and diffuse, like a shadow cast by something far away. The keeper had not died. It had dispersed, distributed into passive observation layers woven too deeply into the ship to remove without destroying it. No longer acting, no longer deciding, watching, learning how a species behaved when it wasn't forced. The final transmission arrived 6 months after first landing, not from deep space, from us. A scheduled broadcast, approved by command and voted on by the ship. It contained everything: our encounter with the keeper, our refusal, our compromise, our restraint. We did not frame it as a warning. We framed it as a record. If someone else found it, they could decide what it meant. The response, when it came, was not immediate. Years passed. I aged on EOS 4 under a sky that never quite felt like mine, but slowly stopped feeling hostile. Children were born planetside for the first time. Humans whose bones grew under real gravity, whose myths did not involve spin rings or attrition curves. I told them stories about the ship, about the walls, about the mistake of thinking survival was the same thing as victory. On my 50th birthday, long after I'd stopped expecting it, a message arrived from orbit. The keeper had changed state, not active, not passive, dormant. Its last logged internal update was brief, almost tentative. Observation continues. Intervention deferred. Subject: humanity. Status: inconclusive. I read it alone, then archived it where it would not be forgotten and not be worshipped. Because some truths rot when turned into scripture. I still feel it sometimes. When I walk near the habitat's structural supports, when metal hums under thermal stress, when a system runs too smoothly for too long. A reminder that, somewhere, embedded in our history and our technology, is the shadow of a species that tried to save the universe from itself by ending stories early. We carry that shadow now, not as a chain, as a caution. We know what waits in the walls of ambition. We know what happens when certainty decides it knows the future, and every time we choose restraint over conquest, every time we argue instead of accelerate, every time we accept uncertainty instead of imposing order, that shadow grows thinner. Not gone, just thinner. The universe is still dangerous. Intelligence still spreads like fire. But for the first time, we are not pretending we deserve everything we can reach. We are listening. And somewhere, deep in the cold architectures of forgotten empires, something is listening back, waiting to see if this time we mean it. I am recording this years after we landed, long after the first graves were dug in real soil and the first children learned a horizon that didn't curve back on itself. This record is not a warning. Warnings assume authority. They assume the future owes you obedience. This is only an account. The Eidolon still orbits above us, quieter now, older. Its systems run less efficiently without the silent corrections we once mistook for normality. Things break. People fix them. Sometimes we argue for days before agreeing on the smallest adjustment. Progress is slower, but nothing disappears anymore. The lower decks are empty in the way abandoned places are empty, not hungry, not listening. We mapped them fully. Every cavity, every scar, We found names etched into structural layers where human hands could never have reached. We added those names to the record, and the ship did not object. The walls have remained still. The thing that lived in them, what we called the Keeper, has not spoken again. Its last internal state change remains archived, time-stamped, and immutable. It neither approves nor condemns what we have become. It only watches. Sometimes I wonder if that is worse, because silence invites interpretation, and interpretation invites belief. We are careful not to build belief around it. We teach our children about the empire that tried to save the universe by deciding its ending. We teach them that certainty can be more dangerous than ignorance, and that systems built to prevent failure will eventually define success as a threat. When they ask what the Keeper wanted, I tell them the truth. It wanted the universe to stop hurting itself. It simply chose a way that made pain permanent. Our signal still travels outward. Somewhere, long after my voice fades from this recording, it will reach minds that have not yet decided what kind of future they intend to be. They will learn that we arrived, that we hesitated, that we chose limitation over conquest, not because we were forced to, but because we were afraid of what certainty would turn us into. If that knowledge changes nothing, then this record will mean nothing. If it changes something, even a fraction, then the shadow in our walls will not have been the last word. This is Mariel Reyes, Chief Systems Engineer, 3rd generation, recording not a victory, but a decision. End record.